What's up, my wizards? It's Deb from Mtg. We like magic, and today we're looking at Muldrotha Undergrowth, a deck that I kinda actually have a lot to say about. So, no time to waste. Let's go ahead and hit the intro, and I'll see you on the other side. Hey, know what this is? This is 12 different rewrites for this deck right here. But you know what they say? 13th time's a charm, and I got it right here. And yeah, I still do everything with ink and paper. I usually find it relaxing, usually, but not necessarily the case with this deck. This is a tough one to build, not because there's not enough cards for it, or you can't figure out like how to fill the slots with decent cards. It's not that at all. Actually, quite the inverse. There's too many good cards that I want to put in this deck that should go in this deck. So making this thing was really, really difficult, and I know there's thousands of other people out there on the internet trying to build it right now. So at the very least, I hope that this thing helps you out in your build. Even if you don't do exactly what I did, I hope it at least gives you some ideas. So, like I said, got a lot to talk about. Let's get to it. And of course, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done it yet, and get over to the Patreon and vote for the next deck you want to see. Polls up right now. What's up, Ziggy? Let's get to this deck once and for all. But anyway, now that Ziggy's here, let's get started with this deck for real. Beginning with the one-drop creatures. We do want to play some one-drops because we want to get on board as early as possible, start chump blocking, soaking up some of that damage as early as we can, and we want the creature that we play in the one-drop slot to be relatively small so that it can go into the graveyard somewhat easily. So, all that said, Standard actually holds the perfect one-drop for this, and it's not Stitcher's Supplier. You may have thought I was going to stay Stitcher's Supplier, and that would make complete and total sense, but after rewriting and labbing over and over with this deck for a couple of weeks, I've decided that Stitcher's Supplier goes ham when you kind of want chicken. You know, it's that friend where it's like 5 o'clock in the morning and your buddy's still like, let's go, man. And you're like, dude, I got work in the morning. I don't know. And Stitcher's Supplier's like, I'm a zombie. I don't have to sleep. And then it pulls out a bag of something. And you're like, okay, I'm going home. I'm no longer in control of the situation, and that's kind of how Stitcher's Supplier feels in this deck. You know, it's just dumping Assassin's trophies and stuff in the graveyard, and you're like, dude, I need those. So, even though there is a creature in this deck that dumps stuff in the graveyard, I ended up not playing Stitcher's Supplier. Conversely, what I wanted on turn 1 was definitely Llanowar Elves, which we ended up playing a 4 of here. Now, we're playing a couple of different 6-drop creatures in this deck, and 6-drops usually not great in Standard. You know, so it's best if we can ramp to them as quickly as we can. Just that extra turn, getting them on turn 5 some of the time, or even turn 4, thanks to double Llanowar Elf starts, can make a huge difference. So that's one of the reasons Llanowar Elves is in the deck, but obviously this opens us up to great turn 2 plays as well. But of course, there's the age-old problem of not always getting Llanowar Elves on turn 1. You know, what are you going to do? Can't be helped. So we're going to play some 2-drops in the deck, starting with the 3 copies of Glowspore Shaman. Looks a little weird because I just said we're not playing Stitcher's Supplier, but this doesn't go anywhere near as hard as Stitcher's Supplier, you know. You still run the risk of dumping a trophy or a necrotic wound into the graveyard, but nowhere near as much as you would running a card like Supplier. So I do like that about it. And you can get back lands and put them on top. That's actually really relevant. You know, that can be relevant all the way up until turn 5 or 6 because we have 6 drops in this deck. But it's also good because it allows you to keep like 2 land hands with a Glowspore Shaman in them, and that's also super relevant. So I like a lot about this card just with its abilities, but as far as its stats go, I think we've forgotten how decent a 2-mana 3/1 can be, you know, and especially in a format with fewer and fewer Goblin Chain Whirlers these days. The card is actually decently statted, because against control decks, it's just going to get in for like 6 or 9 damage. It's a relevant attacking body in the early game they kind of have to do something about, but against aggro decks, it can just trade a lot of the time, you know. It can trade with other 2 and even 3 drops a lot of the time, and just go into the graveyard where you'd kind of rather have it anyway some of the time. So this is relevant against just about any other deck that you're going to come up against, aggro, control, mid-range, whatever, because it's got different roles that it fulfills against each deck, you know. And it's just got the baseline of like dropping stuff in the graveyard for later Undergrowth use or playing out of the graveyard with Muldrotha or whatever. So card begs to be in the deck, and I'm going to play at least 3 copies, but I won't play 4 because, again, I'm super scared of dumping a $25 Assassin's Trophy into the yard. But we're going to play 4 whole copies of Merfolk Branchwalker in the 2-drop slot here, because I think it's the better 2-drop, all things considered. You don't see as many cards as you do with something like Supplier or Glowspore Shaman, but it still gives you a degree of choice on whether or not you want to drop a card in the graveyard, and I think that's a lot more important to have in this deck. Plus, Merfolk Branchwalker is already a more than playable 2-drop in a standard format that doesn't have a whole lot of really playable 2-drops. We've been seeing Merfolk Branchwalker for a year. It's like one of the more played cards from Ixalan blocks, so we already knew it was good, but the Explore mechanic is particularly really good in a deck that's looking to use Undergrowth as a mechanic and get certain payoffs from that, and also, get payoffs off of Muldrotha later. You can play this turn 2, drop a decent thing into the graveyard, and then cash it in a little bit later in the game when you have your Muldrotha safely in place. So Branchwalker was already a good enough card, and it's just taken to another level by a deck like this that really pushes its ability to the limit. It's also really good for smoothing out the mana in our 3-color deck, just like its sister Jadelight Ranger. Mama Luigi is back, overalls and all, because this is an amazing deck for her. Being able to explore twice is incredible in a deck that's looking to take advantage of Undergrowth and Muldrotha later on in the game, so just incredible. She's maybe the best reason to play Llanowar Elves in the 1-drop slot in this deck. If you needed another reason, turn 2 Jadelight Ranger in a deck that's looking to put stuff into its graveyard anyway. That's a good play. But we saved some room here in the 3-drop slot for the 2 copies of Thrashing Brontodon in the deck. Again, if you're playing Llanowar Elves, I feel like this is a no-brainer because it does so much. It's an easy way to put a creature into the graveyard if you need to do that for Undergrowth or Muldrotha or whatever. You can play it over and over again if there's a Muldrotha on the table. Kills any Conclave Tribunals or History of Benalias. There's a lot of good targets for this right now, despite the lack of good artifact targets. There's a lot of good white enchantment targets for a Thrashing Brontodon right now, so still a really, really good card, and it's a really nice body, too, as early as turn 2. This will block something like Knight of Grace, which is actually really important for this deck. I kept having that problem over and over in early development, is that Knight of Grace is just so good. But this is a good brick wall for it. And a bunch of other creatures, Goblin Chain Whirler, Tajik, blah, blah. So this is actually, just for the body's sake, a really good card. But the fact that it's removal, in a way, and an easy way to exploit Undergrowth trigger, all of that is fantastic. Again, Thrashing Brontodon is a card we've seen a lot of in this format up to now in the last year. But it gets even better in a deck like this. But we are playing another 3-drop creature in the deck, and that's just the 1 copy of Midnight Reaper. Now, this is one of my favorite cards from Guilds on a personal level. I just really like everything about this card. From flavor to art, I love the card. But I did reserve a slot to actually play it in a real deck and not just admire it from afar, because obviously this is one of the decks for it. This forms kind of a late-game value engine if a couple of other pieces are in place, but even if those pieces aren't in place, it at least cashes itself in for a card when it dies. That's good. It's got at least decent stats for the mana cost, and it's really good if any of your other creatures die. Llanowar Elves, chump blocks, and dies, you get a card. That's pretty good. Glowspore Shaman trades with a creature in combat and dies. You get a card, and you're officially up a card in that combat exchange. So there's a lot of good things about Midnight Reaper, but I don't think it's better than the other 3 drops that we're currently playing. So I don't want to run too many copies, but I do want at least the 1. But into the 4s here, we're going to play 3 copies of Ravenous Chupacabra, and it was actually 4 copies for a long time during development because this card is finally living up to the potential we once thought it had. We've seen Ravenous Chupacabra over the last year in a few different decks as, 2 and 3 ofs occasionally, but it never really lived up to its potential. But now it's becoming the card we always thought that it could be. It's really popular here at the beginning of the format in what black decks actually do exist, because right now we're seeing a lot of Steel-Leaf Champions, a lot of Galtas, Lyra Dawnbringers, Aurelia the War Leaders. There's just a ton of very, very good targets to 2-for-1 your opponent when you play your Chups. And we actually have a trick in this deck that allows us to sacrifice Chupacabra every turn, draw a card, and just replay it out of our graveyard with Muldrotha every single turn, which will end the game very, very fast. So in the very late game, this obviously has a ton of relevance, but in the mid-game, it's super good too. Sometimes this will help you turn the corner because it's an effective 2-for-1 just about every single time you play it. But we're also playing 3 copies of Doom Whisperer in the deck because this thing is outrageously powerful. I shouldn't have to tell you that. The stats are crazy for the mana cost. The Surveil is awesome for this deck. Shouldn't have to tell you that either. Dumps cards in your graveyard, gets you to your Muldrothas and whatever else you need much faster. So, yes, to Doom Whisperer, why not? but there are some specifically cool things about this card in this deck. First of all, actually curving Doom Whisperer into Muldrotha is just too much pressure, to the point where Muldrothas almost win more, but again, you're really pressuring them if you're able to do that. But if you play your Doom Whisperer and it gets immediately Assassin's Trophied, well, that gives you the 6th mana that you need to play your Muldrotha anyway, and it drew the important removal out of their hand, so Muldrotha is a lot safer in that situation. Same thing with Justice Strike. Doom Whisperer can get hit by Justice Strike immediately, but that makes it a little bit safer to play your Muldrotha on the next turn. And the curve leading up to Doom Whisperer is really good too, If you just go like Chupacabra into Doom Whisperer, that's strong enough by itself, but on those games where you go like, Jade Light, Chupacabra, Doom Whisperer, you're probably going to win that game. That's just ridiculous pressure. So sometimes this deck has the kind of starts where even if you're not doing anything crazy with Undergrowth or you're not replaying anything out of your graveyard with Muldrotha, you just crush them with raw power on curve. This deck has the ability to do that. Doom Whisperer is kind of a big part of that for finishing games off. But believe it or not, Muldrotha, which I haven't even gotten to yet, is not the only 6-drop in this deck. And I know that sounds crazy, but that's one of the reasons we're playing Lawn Order Elves. I want to make 6-drops a little bit more viable because I want to make some room for Izoni in this deck. Izoni is just nuts. She's bonkers in this thing. We're running a ton of creatures in this deck. If you haven't noticed, it's all I've talked about so far is creatures. Creature after creature. So by the time this actually does come down, we can usually get like 3, 5, 6 bugs off of it occasionally. And that's just crazy. The ability to draw extra cards off of those bugs or any other creatures we want to sacrifice makes the deck kind of aristocratic, and it allows us to set up these loops. We've got another card that allows us to do this, but Izoni is an important part of this too. If we can get to the late game and set up Muldrotha plus Izoni, then we can do things like sacrifice Ravenous Chupacabra to Izoni and replay it. In that case, we've killed a creature, drawn a card, gained a life. That's insane. We've got so many valued creatures in this deck. Things like Glowspore Shaman, Merfolk Branchwalker, Jade Light Ranger, Chupacabra, they all do something when they enter the battlefield. So if we can get into a situation where we can sacrifice those creatures every turn, gain a life, draw a card, replay them with Muldrotha and repeat their into the battlefield triggers, that's a crazy, grindy engine that's actually really easy to exploit if we can get to that point in the game. But sometimes Izoni will just finish things off before you even have to worry about switching over to Aristocrats mode. But we finally made it to Muldrotha, who I probably should have just started the deck tech off with. She's in here. I am a little bit wary. I will go ahead and say this, and I know you probably already discussed this at length in the comments section, but I am a little bit wary of playing Muldrotha in a format with Assassin's Trophy and Justice Strike. I've already mentioned those cards in this video, but hopefully things like Jade Light Ranger, Doom Whisperer earlier on the curve than this will draw those cards out of their hand. And even if they don't, we've got multiple Muldrothas and a way to get them out of the graveyard if we absolutely have to later on in the game. So even if we do get our Muldrotha killed, it's not all is lost. And that kind of value engine is just insane in the late game. Muldrotha is still queen of, turn 10. And that's not going to change anytime soon. If your games run long, Muldrotha will win them for you. Now, believe it or not, we made some room for some non-creature stuff in this deck. Sounds crazy, but I wanted at least 2 copies of Vraska Golgari Queen in here, and it was 3 for the longest time, but honestly, it's not as important as it looks, This can come down on turn 4 and blow a creature away, just abrupt decay something for you, that's a pretty good use for the card right there. And obviously, if we have something we want to sacrifice, then we can draw an extra card. And that is where the card gets very good. But it's usually not that desirable until we have our Muldrotha down anyway. So I think 2 copies is fine. But I'm also going to play 1 copy of the Eldest Reborn in here. Low-key, one of the most powerful cards in the entire format, and I'm not even kidding. And it goes especially well in our deck, where Muldrotha allows us to play it over and over again, And it's a permanent, so even if Glowspore Shaman drops it into our graveyard, we can get it back later on with Moldy Toes. So the card is just unbelievable, It allows us to not only get an important card we may have lost back, but if we killed something good with Assassin's Trophy or Ravenous Chupacabra, then we can get it out of their graveyard. If we've been able to take out a Teferi or whatever, then we can get it out of their graveyard. And by the way, this card itself can take out a Teferi when you need it to. So it's decent against control, decent against aggro, decent against mid-range. It's just got play against just about every deck in the format right now. So I'm going to at least make room for the 1 copy. But let's finish it off with some removal here. We're going to play 3 copies of Assassin's Trophy, and then 3 copies of Necrotic Wound. In a lot of ways, Assassin's Trophy is one of the best reasons not to play Stitcher Supplier in this deck. And I've brought that up a couple of times in the video. And it's not just because it's an expensive card, it's because it's, by all accounts, just about the best removal piece printed in the last few years, and that's saying something considering we just had Fatal Push in the format. But this is an insane removal piece, and I never want to lose it if I don't have to. So it's one of the big reasons I didn't play Stitcher Supplier in the deck, because Assassin's Trophy is obviously the better card. Ask yourself that question. You know, which is the better card? Assassin's Trophy just is. I'm playing Necrotic Wound too, because it's just 1 mana to kill just about anything in the late game, which is insane. And, very importantly, it exiles Rekindling Phoenixes, which is a card we see a lot of. Red-white is everywhere, from Boros aggro to red-white midrange, and Rekindling Phoenix is one of the best cards in that deck, one of the best cards against us. So Necrotic Wound is definitely kind of a silver bullet against it, and I'd run it if only for that reason, but it's good against literally every other creature in the format too. Now here are our lands, and there's only 23 of them in this deck. That looks dangerously low, but remember, again, Glowspore Shaman, Merfolk Branchwalker, Jadelight Ranger, Lawn War Elves, we've got a fair amount of both mana sources outside of our mana base and ways to find lands as well. Now here's our sideboard, and yeah, I'm playing Pilfering Imp, baby. This is better than Duress in this deck, and maybe better than Duress in every deck. This is a creature that can attack control decks. That's pretty cool, but starting on turn 2, it can also just get something out of their hand, the best card in their hand, and it's actually really good. I've been pretty impressed by Pilfering Imp so far. If they have to waste a removal spell on it, that's actually not a bad outcome. So I actually don't think Pilfering Imp is a bad card, and I expect it to show up in sideboards as the season progresses. Again, I was very impressed by Imp. But you'll also notice the 3 Plague Crafter in the sideboard, which is an especially important card. This is a holdover from the days where I was playing Stitcher Supplier as my 1-drop. Because in a deck where Supplier is your 1-drop, Plague Crafter is insane. I just want to point that out. But even though we're not playing Supplier, Plague Crafter still has a place in the 75. This is really, really decent against control decks, first of all. It doesn't do anything you don't want to do. If they happen to have a creature out, they sacrifice it. If they happen to have a Planeswalker and no creatures, they have to get rid of their Teferi. If they don't have those things out, they have to discard a card. This never does nothing against anything, and that's really good. It's important against creatures like Vinemare and Carnage Tyrant that we don't have a whole lot of other answers to. The Eldest Reborn can sometimes be a decent answer to those creatures, but this gives us 3 more answers, and that's particularly important. Plus, it works really, really well in a deck that has Undergrowth payoffs and is trying to play Muldrotha, just like Chupacabra. This is something that you can play every single turn, only you don't have to have a sacrifice outlet. It's its own sacrifice outlet, so it goes really, really well with Muldrotha if you just want to get something off their side of the board every turn. But I'm also playing the 3-up Phyrexian Scriptures in the sideboard. This is actually a really important card. And you could play Ritual of Soot if you wanted to instead, but I like the fact that we can get this back with the Muldrotha if we absolutely have to. And sometimes just putting the counter on your Muldrotha, making it an artifact, and then blowing everything up next turn is game winning. That in and of itself can win the game. But this can also help you turn the corner, against aggro decks and tokens decks. You get this on turn 4, blow everything up, the next turn. Then that can really, really help you turn corners because you have a lot of resiliency and you want to make it to turn 6. A lot of games, you're trying to withstand the aggro onslaught, and if you can just have a panic button to reset the game, you can easily make it to the turns that allow you to take the game over. So some of the time, this is a really important card, and it's going to come in an awful lot. But here are your power rankings right here. A final score of 67, not a bad grade at all, in terms of how competitive a deck can be. That's pretty high up there. But it better be, because it's kind of an expensive deck. I don't know if you noticed, there's a lot of high-price stuff in here, and I'm sorry about that. But we're trying to make the best deck that we can. And in terms of that, this is a pretty good deck, It's got a great late game. If you can actually get into the late game, it does a lot of crazy stuff, and it's got all these ridiculous value engines that once you can actually get them set into motion, they almost always win you the game, Vraska or Izoni plus Muldrotha and any value creature in the entire deck is filthy, it's disgusting, it's repulsive, and it wins games. So if you can get a value engine in place, you can win that way. But again, I should bring this up. The deck can just win off of pure curving out. Something like, Lawn War Elves and a Jadelight Ranger and a Chupacabra, which is not as hard as it sounds because you got a Jadelight Ranger on turn 2. Into Doom Whisperer is just really hard for a lot of people to do anything about. So sometimes you won't even do jack with your graveyard. You just curve out and beat their face in with big dudes. Now, if you are interested in trying this thing out, it is expensive. It's about $365 on TCG Player right now. Just save $1 every day for the next year. You can play this deck. A lot of places this deck will cost you north of $400, but my buddies over at TCG Player helping keep the lights on around here. You know, they are my sponsors, full disclosure. They are also the cheapest place you're going to get the deck, just factually. So check out the first link in the description, click that thing, go over to the deck list, peruse their wares, and buy any pieces you might need if you're interested in this deck. And again, even if you don't buy this exact version of the deck or play this exact version, I just hope that I was able to help you out, because there's thousands of people building this deck right now, and they all have the same complaint. There's too many good pieces for it. So hope I helped you whittle it down. Hope I helped you make some decisions. If not, I don't know. I hope I helped some way or another. I just hope I helped brighten your day, kid. But in any case, before I get out of here, remember to do all the stuff. You know, like the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done it for the deck deckage, and get over to Patreon and vote on what you want to see next. Poll is up right this second. If you're not a dollar patron yet, go on over there, pledge your buck. Not only can you vote for what you want to see, but I'll let you know what decks are coming out the day before they come out. A lot of value for a buck. Head on over. There's a link in the description for that one too. But pretty sure I'm tapped out for this one, so I'll catch you cats later. I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.